and thanks for joining today for this week's RhoMobile weekly webinar. Let's get the presentation started. So today we'll be going over how to use RhoMobile and build an application for big windows, for desktop windows. I will be your presenter for today, yours truly. So we'll be going through that topic. Before we get to that, I just want to give you an update on what's coming up next week, as well as always end the call with kind of a nice tidbit resource of the week. As usual, just some housekeeping. Just make sure you type in your questions in the GoToMeeting section, the question area. I am recording this session, and typically we'll post this by tomorrow on Launchpad. And as always, if you could kindly just give me some feedback on this session as well as what you'd like to see coming up in the future webinars at the end of the conference, that would be great. You'll be presented with a short question survey at the end when you exit the webinar. All right, so next week our topic will jump back to performance-related conversations. I will be giving a presentation on front-end UI performance optimization. So taking a look at just the front end, how can we optimize your application so that it's not having performance issues with rendering and reflows, and how to design your screens and what elements you should be staying away from to make your application very snappy in terms of its performance. So look forward to that next week at the same time. If you missed last week's session, we did a session on RhoConnect and how to connect directly to a database, which was presented by Jeff Paremba. There's the QR code for the replay if you'd like to take a look at that. That is a good presentation. So if you missed it, definitely take a look at the webinar. As always, we're looking for any guest speakers that like to present on these webinars. If you're a developer or partner that has developed the next greatest jQuery plugin or something else, and you'd like to speak to the community, please reach out to me, and we will arrange that. All right, so let's get into the main topic for today. And I apologize for my voice today. I'm suffering from a bit of a cold here. So, all right, so today's topic, building for big windows. And how do we do that? Why would we want to do that? What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you a couple of different ways you can do this. So first, I'll actually show you kind of an easy method where you don't really need to set up anything besides RhoStudio on your development machine, and using RhoHub, and how to actually use RhoHub to develop a Windows application. So I'm going to walk through those steps and how to set that up, and then we'll do it the other way in terms of setting up your local environment like you may be doing today for the mobile platforms, and going through those steps and walk through the tutorial on setting up your local environment and actually creating an executable that will run on Windows 32, as well as creating an installer that goes along with that exe. And then lastly, we'll get into some considerations. Now that this application will be running on a larger desktop, what are some of the things that you should take into consideration for your application, and how can you still take that same mobile code and use it across this bigger form factor? So first off, let's just talk a little bit about why you would want to do this. This may not be something that everybody wants to do, but some situations definitely come in play here. So the first case is, let's say you do have a manager or somebody that's actually semi-mobile. They're typically sitting behind the desk or in a laptop, and then maybe they're in the warehouse or wandering around mobile, and they have a mobile device on them. So they may want to have access to that same application, the same data set. Could be looking at tasks or inventory, what have you. So wouldn't it be nice if you can provide that to that user? And we'll show you how to do that. So that's one kind of use case. The other use case is just supporting devices, that enterprise-level devices that do have large screens and are running Windows 32. So as you know, we just recently acquired Scion. They have a vehicle-mounted computer that actually runs Windows 32, and there's other products like this that also support Windows 32 as a platform. So, you know, again, your application should work on Windows Mobile, Android, iOS, as well as the big Windows, the Windows 32-bit platform. And really, it supports anything that runs XP, Windows 7, and Windows 8. You know, it's kind of in beta stage right now. So now let me just walk through a demonstration of how to actually build. So like I said before, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use RhoHub, and I'm going to step away from the slides for a minute and show you this live. So if you haven't set up a RhoHub account, definitely do that. It's free, and you just simply register. Once you're registered, there's really two things you need to do to enable you to kick off a RhoHub build from RhoStudio. This is really a fairly new feature that we put into the 2.1 RhoMobile suite that's quite handy. So I'm running, as you can see, on a Windows 7 machine right now, and I'm going to show you how to build. So first thing we want to do is to set up the RhoHub and RhoStudio connection, make sure everything is configured right. And the two things you need to do is, first off, log into your RhoHub account. And click on the profile. And there's two pieces to this. There's setting up the SSH key and setting up the API token. And you need those two pieces. This is the biggest mistake I see everybody make in not being able to connect to their RhoHub account from RhoStudio, is not having these two configurations set up properly. As you may know, RhoHub uses a private Git repository to manage all of your applications in the cloud. And if you're familiar with GitHub and using that, you'll be very familiar with using RhoHub. And the first thing you need to do is to set up the SSH key and provide that to your RhoHub account. Depending on what machine you're running on, you will access and get your SSH key in different ways. If you click on this More Info button, you will see instructions for Mac OS X, Windows, Linux, etc. If you just follow these instructions, you'll be able to get your SSH key. And once you get your SSH key on that particular machine, right, that you'll be building from, it'll look something like this. Okay, so this is a big, long string, but this is the information that you need to provide to RhoHub. So that's kind of step number one. Let's get that SSH key in the RhoHub account profile. Okay, the next thing is taking a look at your API token. So here's your API token, which is provided here, and this is a secret key, which I'm going to change after this presentation, that you will provide to RhoStudio. So once you have those two pieces of information, you're basically going to copy this API key. And now I'm inside of RhoStudio, and we want to set up the RhoStudio environment so that it knows, how to talk to your RhoHub account. Right? Remember, we're looking to build this Win32 version of our application, in the cloud. We can use RhoHub to do the same thing for, an iOS build, Android, what have you. But for this demonstration, we're just going to show Windows 32. Same type of steps will still apply, though. So now that I set my SSH key and I have my API token, I want to go into my preferences, Windows Preferences, and go into the RhoMobile section. And in the RhoMobile section, you'll see a setting for RhoHub. If you don't see this information here, then you haven't installed the latest release of RhoMobile Suite. So you need to have 2.1 and above in order to have this capability. So you can see here that I've already pasted my API token in here, but here's the URL for don't touch this. This is how we, basically what it's doing is it's using REST to talk to RhoHub and our REST services. So you basically only need to provide the API token in order for us to communicate properly. Okay. If you are behind a proxy, right now the proxies are not supported, so you need to be able to have a clear path to the RhoHub URL. All right, so anyway, so basically now I'm set up and all ready to go to create my RhoHub application. So let's just start off with a brand new. We'll just start from scratch. So we'll just do a new project, and we'll select RhoMobile application, and let's just call this Hello Win32 Test. Okay. And we're going to this is just a standard, application generation wizard that we provide with RhoMobile's RhoStudio. You can see I have a couple of different projects here. But here's my Hello Win32 test. And really, without doing anything, well, actually, let's add a model, just make this interesting. We'll just say Model 1, Property 1. This doesn't really matter. I'm assuming you have an application already. We're not going to go through actually building a real true application here. But anyway, so here's just kind of a basic scaffolding for the application that you've seen before. So now let's say I have my application complete, and now I want to kick off develop a Win32 executable that I want to provide to my users. So I'm going to select the project here, and inside of RhoStudio, I'm going to select the RhoMobile menu option and click on RhoHub Build. Okay. So now what this is going to do is it's going to take a look at the repository on the back end in RhoHub and make sure that it can talk to RhoHub. So it's going to show you this prompt and says that this project doesn't exist, which it doesn't. I've just created this as you saw. I'm going to click OK. And now it's going to ask you, again, do you want to create this new application on RhoHub? You might see some other applications that you have there. So if we just jump back to my RhoHub account, you can see that it's listing my project. So it's a good indication here that you have the link set up properly so that you can communicate. And now I'm just going to click the link button. And what it's doing in the background is it's going in and actually, doing the REST calls to RhoHub to set up the project on the back end. And essentially what this is doing is on RhoHub, if you don't know anything about RhoHub, it's going to, run the build in the cloud, okay, and we'll show you that. So let me just type in my password. And that's another good sign that everything is set up. If you didn't see the password prompt come up, you probably didn't put in the SSH key properly or the API token. So something is broken in that setup if you didn't actually get to that point. So this may take a couple minutes, and depending on your size of your application, it may take longer. If you have a lot of resources, if you have a lot of pages, what have you, it all depends. It also depends on how many people are using RhoHub as well. So you can see here that it presents you with an option for the type of device, the platform version, etc. And as I mentioned before, RhoHub lets you build across a variety of different target devices. The important thing here I want to point out is make sure that this says the Rhodes version says 3.4.2, at least 3.4.2. Okay, we had Win32 support in the past in Rhodes, but as of the 3.4.2 build, it's now effectively officially supported. So make sure that you select that version. Now in this case, like I said, I'm going to pick the Win32 platform. So my target device is Win32. And there's really no different flavors or versions on that, so I'm just going to select Win32. Now I'm going to select Build. Now what it's asking me is it's asking me for a destination directory where it's going to put the installation or the result of the build, right, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So let me just make a new folder. We'll just put this in my root, Hello Win32 Test. Okay, so now it's telling RhoHub on the back end, go ahead and start that build. So it's going to add it to the queue. It'll go through and actually, start doing the build. Once you get past that point, you can do whatever else you need to do locally here. You can see in the lower right-hand corner that, it's going to continually check for the build progress. And you should see a prompt come up when the build is done. You can also take a look at this progress bar as well, and effectively it's pulling the back end to see if the build is ready. So I'm going to jump back to the slides and just go through some more information while that's going on, and then when we get to a certain point, we'll see the prompt come up. All right, and I have all of some slides as well, what I've walked through basically, so you can see that. I'm going to post these slides after the presentation, but I wanted to show you live. So these are all the screens that we got to, and what we'll end up seeing is this prompt come up that says the build is finished, and then effectively what it produces, it saves in that folder that you provided the installation. So this is an installer for your application, an exe that is effectively the installer for your application, and we'll talk about the installer a little bit more in detail, in the next coming slides here. Okay. So that's kind of like the easy way to build for Win32 using RhoHub. There's nothing I needed to do besides install 2.1 RhoMobile Suite on my desktop laptop. I didn't need to install anything else locally. We're just kicking off the build in the cloud, and it'll deliver and install. Pretty easy, I think. All right, pretty straightforward. Once you have the RhoHub connection set up, I think it's pretty straightforward. Now what I'm going to show you is kind of the other way to do it. If you want to see a little bit more what's going on during the build, you just like to run everything locally. Maybe you don't have access to the cloud for whatever reason, and you want to just build locally. So I'm going to walk through those. It's really the kind of same setup that happens in the cloud, but everything is locally on your development environment. So as I mentioned, you need RhoMobile Suite 2.1. You will also need Visual Studio 2008 or above. And you also need to install a couple of things. The first thing you need to install is Qt libraries. So here's the link for them. There's the QR code for the download as well. And what this basically provides is it provides a WebKit container that we will be using on the desktop. So this is actually the same WebKit that we use in RhoSimulator. So when you run RhoSimulator today, this is using the Qt WebKit, and effectively now it's letting you take what you're experiencing in your RhoSimulator, but be able to package this up in a standalone application so that you can distribute it to your Win32 users. Okay. In the future, we'll also be able to provide, as you know, we also provide a Motorola WebKit in the form of a RhoElements type of application. Today we don't have that. That will be coming in the future. Okay. So you're going to want to install the Qt libraries, and after you have the Qt libraries installed, there's a couple things you want to do. The first thing you want to do is add a system environment variable called Qt-dir for the directory of the Qt library. So as you know, when we build things locally, we do everything kind of through the command line, so we need to make sure that we know where the Qt libraries is. So that's pretty straightforward. The other thing we want to do is we want to add to our path, we want to add the Qt bin folder. Okay, so you can see that here, that I added that to my system path. So it's the Qt libraries bin folder. Excuse me. So you can see that I'm using version 4.7.4 for Qt libraries. There is a 4.8, which may work, but currently we support the 4.7.4 version. So use this one. Okay, so once you have your Qt environment variable set up, we need to make sure that the Visual Studio build.exe is in your preferences. So if you've already been building for Windows Mobile, chances are you've already set this up in RhoStudio preferences, and you already have that in there. But just double check, make sure you have it pointing to the proper version of VC build. And in the case if you're using Visual Studio 2010, it will be MS build. And you can get to it two different ways. You can go into Preferences, Windows Mobile in RhoStudio, or you can actually just crack open the RhoBuild.yml file and take a look at the what you have in there. Okay, so my environment's set up here properly for this. Let's go to the next step. All right, so let me jump back out to to RhoStudio. You can see the build is still going on here in the cloud. So I bet you everybody's trying to do this at the same time. But anyway, so here we go. I'm going to go into the command line, and let me just jump back to the slides for a second. So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually build for Win32, and there's kind of two steps. The first step is to just build the exe, and then the second step is to create the installer. So to do this, you're going to use the command line, one of our rake commands to do the Win32 build. Okay, it's not integrated into RhoStudio. It's in the command line. Okay, so I'm going to, you can see we created Hello Win32 test, so let me just, and just in case you guys forget the rake command, you can always do a rake-t, as you know, and it will show you all of the commands. Okay, so you can see here, rake run Win32. That's all we need to do. Excuse me. So if we issue that command, it's going to go through the build. In the command prompt, you'll see kind of the build log, just as you would in RhoStudio. Typically, when you're building for the other platforms, you would see it inside of the progress area for RhoStudio. Essentially, you're seeing this in the command. All right, and you can see that it actually launched. So a couple things I want to point out here. Excuse me. First thing is, if the build succeeded, if this rake command actually succeeded, you would see the simulator pop up like you did. Now, if it didn't, then something went wrong up above. Maybe you didn't have the path properly. One of the mistakes I made was having some things open. So it's kind of a contention for access to files. So, but anyway, you can kind of skim through here the log and see what's going on. But you'll see that the application opened up. And the one thing I wanted to point out was this feature, the ability to build for Windows 32, is something that we're only providing in a RhoElements application. So you need to have a RhoElements license in order to do that. So it's the enterprise feature, and we want to support the enterprise, larger environments that have Win32. So you need to have a deployment license. I'm not going to get into the setup for the deployment license in this presentation, but it's required in order for you to actually deploy this in a real situation. For development purposes, you can just click OK, and the application is still fully functional. Okay, this is more for legitimate deployments where you need to license. So this is the application that's running here. We didn't really do anything with this application, but you can see the application was started there. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things. And looks like the build actually finished before from RhoHub. So this is the message that I talked to you about before. So I'm just going to click OK just to get rid of that message, and you can see that in my Hello Win32 test, it actually it gave the zip file, and inside the zip file we have the installation. Okay, so we're not going to launch the installation right this second. We're going to just continue along with the local setup here. All right, so now let's just jump back to my slides for a minute. So this is where we're at. We created our application locally. We set up the local environment. We just kicked off the rake command to build the exe, and this exe is kind of just running locally. Now you want to package up your application and create the installer. So just like in RhoHub, that was all done in one step. So you basically said build, it went through, it built it, it then came back and gave you an installer, and that exe that was provided from RhoHub was essentially an installer. So actually, let me just kick that off so you can see what I'm talking about. I'll just click Run. So this was, again, from RhoHub. All right, and so you can see that it's a typical installer, right, for a Windows 32 application. So we're going to cancel that. So the difference here in the local environment is that you can do it in kind of two steps. So the reason I bring that up, and it may be a little confusing right now, but the reason I bring it up, this two-step process, is because from a development point of view, it's a little, it's a lot quicker to test your application by just running this rate command, launching the application, going through the screens, making sure everything's working right, and not worry about installer and going through the install every single time. So that's kind of another benefit of doing it locally, is that from a development point of view, just the workflow is a lot quicker, right? So anyway, so that's kind of step number one. Now let's say we go through the iteration of testing the application out, and now we want to actually build the installer locally, okay? So in order to do that, you need to install an installer. We provide a link to an open source one, which is quite nice. So download that, install that, and the only thing you need to do is to provide a path to this NSIS installer. So inside of the RhoBuild.yaml, right, which by the way, a lot of people may not know where that location of that file is. So let me just bring that up. So the RhoBuild.yaml is wherever you install RhoMobile Suite. So I'm going to go to RhoMobile Suite 2.1.1.7. That's my location. It's in Ruby, lib, Ruby, gems, 1.9.1. And if you aren't dizzy yet, it's gems. And then go to roads, right? So there's the RhoBuild.yaml. Okay, so it's always in that same kind of path structure. So anyway, let me open up my RhoBuild.yaml, and you can see that I added this NSIS location for the installer utility that I'm going to use. Okay. So now the only thing we need to do, we have the installer now linked properly to our build environment. We built the application. Now we want to actually build an installer. So again, this is done through a rate command, and the rate command is rate device Win32 production. Okay. So let's kick that off. Let's see what happens. So again, that's going to go through some build process. You'll see the log in the console there. And at the end of the day, not the end of the day, shortly, that this will create an EXE just like RhoHub did, where it's actually an installer, right? And then we'll go through the installer and show you what the default installer looks like, and then we'll show you how to tweak some of the parameters, add some things to the installation process. All right, so what happens? So we have an output here. It looks like it kind of went through some other steps here and created this. You can see that it actually tells you where it is, but it's always going to be in your project workspace, your project, and let me show you that. So let me just go to my workspace. Okay, here's all of my RhoStudio projects, and this is the one we just created, Hello Win32 Test. Excuse me. And after you run that rate command to build the installer, it actually packages up nicely in the bin folder, target, Win32. Okay? So you can see that it created an EXE. Let's go ahead and launch that EXE and see what happens. So here's the typical installer, which is going to install the application. This is what you would package up and send out to your users. I'm going to click Next. It's just some basic screens here. There's really no options. The default location is the application name. You can change that here if you want. But I'm going to just install that there. And then it's going to go and install the application. Okay? So completing the Hello Wizard, set up wizard, let's click Finish. And now let's go to the the actual folder. So here's what the installer did. It doesn't actually add to the start menu, but it does, install the application, right? And we'll tell you I'll show you in a minute how to tweak some of these things with the icon and all. So here again, I just launched the application, and you can see it's the same thing as if, I ran the other rate command before, but now it's actually an installer and an installation. Okay. So now let's talk about some other things you may want to add to the installer. Again, this walkthrough is in slides as well. If you just want to look at the slides, this kind of shows you what we did. All right. So now let's say usually in an installer you need to provide a license. You need to provide maybe a README. So you can do that quite easily. You just need to add those files. So let's go ahead and do that. So let me go back to my project here, and that's not what I wanted. All right, so let's. I'm going to steal a license text. So here's some license I have from another project, and also a README. Since I just took the default RhoMobile Suite README, so you can kind of see what that looks like. I'm going to take these two from another project, and I'm just going to copy them into my Hello Win32 test that we just created. Okay, so that's all you need to do is you need to provide those files for your license and README, and then go through and create the installer again. So let's go ahead and do that. Create the installer, and now you can see what it looks like. So we're going to run that rate command again. That rate device Win32 production. And then we're going to take a look at the installer and see what that looks like. All right, so it's almost done here. All right, so now I've created the new installer. So let's go back to my workspace. And launch the new installer. The workspace project name, bin, target, 32. And just check the time here. So to create a new one, let's launch that and see what that installation looks like. So the first screen is the same. Now you actually see a license. So here's the license text that we provided, nicely put in there. And it has the agree button, so that functionality is in there. This next screen is the same as what we had before. This next screen is the same. And then this time, after the installation is done, you actually have an option to kick off a README. So you pretty much have a complete installer here that you can provide. And here's the README that we provided in our project. All right, so those are really the two methods that you need to execute in order to build a Windows 32 platform. Either RhoHub, no installation, no setup on your laptop, or set the local environment up for having the Qt libraries as well as the NSIS installer, and then you'll be able to build for Windows 32. So now let's just spend a few moments in talking about some of the things you may want to introduce to your application to handle Windows 32 differently than some of your other application code for mobile devices, right? As you know, of course, the screen's going to be bigger, the resolution is going to be different than your typical mobile. Ideally, all of our code will be a responsive layout and be able to adapt to anything, orientation, size, etc. So we provide a couple of different ways you can do this, right? If you just run the default application generation, you'll see that we do have some of this code in there already in the layout.erb, but we don't actually have a default CSS file for big windows, right? So one thing you can do is you can always call our helper API system, and the method is get property. Get property, and there's different properties you can get, and I would look at the documentation if you want to see the complete list. But the two that I pulled out here is get property platform and get property device name. So platform, if you do a get property platform, it'll come back as Windows Desktop. So now you can use that in a variety of different ways, right? In your layout.erb, you can check, okay, if the platform is Windows Desktop, use the Windows 32.css file instead of the Windows Mobile, right? So you can add that there. You can also use that same call in your controllers for maybe changing behavior because maybe a lot of the hardware APIs are not available, like camera, for example. So you don't want to enable the camera, right? So in this case, in this code snippet down below, we see that I'm doing a system get property platform Windows Desktop, and I'm just redirecting to a different view instead of actually, turning on the camera, enabling that. So that's one way you can kind of handle, this scenario so that your code can adapt to the particular platform you're on. Another way that you can do things, and you see this in our default application generation. I don't know if you're developing on BlackBerry, you know what this is, but by default we include these different views for the BlackBerry devices. Well, I don't know if you knew this, but you can actually do the same thing for the other platforms, iOS, Android, and in Win32 as well. So in this case, Win32 may be a little bit more useful for doing it this way, right? When you're not doing it in code, you actually have different views per platform. That's quite nice, right? On Win32, the screen's going to be bigger. So instead of having to conditionalize things in your code and make it messy and spaghetti-like, why not just have a complete new view for this particular platform? So in this case, instead of just having typically on your mobile device, you might have just a list. Why not provide the whole list detail on the same screen? So to do that, and this goes for any file that you create, any view, you just add the .win32 before the ERB. And when you run it on Win32 platform, our framework will use that view automatically without you doing anything instead of the other views, the default view. Okay. Now, I have an asterisk next to this, and the reason is this was recently fixed in the master branch for roads. So it's not in the 2.11 download. It doesn't work. But if you pull down the latest roads repository from GitHub and the master branch, this functionality is in there. So take a look at that. It's quite nice and quite useful for dynamically changing your views per platform. All right, so the other thing you may want to do is start your application off in a maximized state, right? So here in my application.rb, where the application is initializing, I'm using that system get property again, and checking for Windows Desktop, and then I'm calling the web view, which is one of our APIs, and calling the full screen mode method. So let's do that in our application just as a quick example. And so I want to show you something about that. All right, so here we go. I'm in here now. I mentioned in the slides that it's not full screen. It's actually maximized state, right? So let's do that so you can see what I'm talking about. So we're just going to say, if system.get property platform excuse me. All right, so let's save that, and let's just run. Now again, I'm not going to run the installer. I'm just going to run kick it off in exe mode by rake run Win32. Oh, and I can already see that I messed up. So hold on a second. Nobody caught that. This is what happens when you're talking by yourself on a webinar. You have nobody else to say, hey, Rob, you screwed up. All right, so here we go. Let me just double check. That should be right. Should have just copy and pasted it. All right, so here we go. Let's kick it off again. System.getProperty underscore property platform. Yep. Didn't do it. Okay. So let's see. I'll try to save it. That would help. Anyway, all right. So we're going to actually let's kick that off again. And then while it's kicking off, let me go over some of the other things. So some of the other things you may want to do is change the icon and the application name, right? So you saw that, you know, if by default it just picked whatever my project name was for the EXE, and it also just picked the standard icon. So this is true for the mobile apps, and it behaves the same as well, right? Okay, so there you go. I forgot to save the file before. So this is the full screen. It's really not full screen; it's maximized, right? So you can see here that it's essentially almost the same thing as the simulator, but it's a standalone application, and you have your menus here, which we'll talk about in a second. But this is just kind of starting off in maximized mode. We don't have a true blue, full screen mode. It's just maximized. So let me close that. The other thing that I wanted to show you was changing the application name and icon. This is handled from just changing the icons in the icon folder. So if we go back into the application here, Hello Win32 Test, look at our icons. We can change these files here, and then on the actual icon, the shortcut that's created on desktop will be the new icon. So it won't look like a Rhodes application. The one thing I want to mention about the name for the installer utility that we're using, NSIS, it doesn't like blank spaces in the name. So you need to have something that actually doesn't, that will work around the space issue. So the name of the application is in the build.yaml. So if you open up the build.yaml and we change that, it will change the name of the EXE as well as what's displayed in the title area. All right, so one other thing that you may want to do is change the menu. So and just kick off that application again, so you can see the menu. So now this is true for mobile applications as well, but you may want to do this for a Win32 application because that menu will be there, and typically I think users that are using Windows 32 applications are looking for a menu, right? So you do have control over this main menu over here. So this is our default kind of main menu, right? And you can easily change that. So you can go into the application.rb and change it, and you can also change it per controller. So let's say in a particular controller you want it to have a different menu scheme, you can do that, right? And the way that it's handled is through this basically creating a hash, right? Called menu if you're in a controller, and it's called default menu if you're not in a controller, if you're in the application.rb. And you basically define a name and then an action for the menu, right? So in this case, you can see in this screenshot, here's my menu code. Go home is going to do the home action, et cetera, et cetera. So now let's talk about the action type. So you see here, we are picking this like a list of predefined actions. So I call them reserved actions, like colon home, colon refresh. These are like predefined things that that we have that's available to you. You can also do a special item for a menu separator to put a separator bar, and you can also include a full URL, or you can use even the URL helper for a particular action and method name, right? So I actually recommend using the URL for at all cases. This way you're not worried about messing up the paths. Each one of these options will actually cause the whole web view to refresh. The only way there's one way you can do it without actually touching the UI, and it's through a callback. So if you wanted to actually have a menu option that might do some sort of process, data retrieval, you want it to happen asynchronously and not change the UI at all, you would do it through a callback menu item. And to do that, you would basically use this syntax here. You would say callback : and then the URL for the method that you want to be called back when the operation is complete. Okay. So, and you can see in this example, I'm using it in this Model 1 controller, and this menu will appear when that model is opened up. Okay, and there's a callback that'll show. We're running out of time, so I don't want to actually do that walkthrough, but that's how you would do that. All right, so some more information about building for Windows 32 can be found on our doc site. So if you go to docs.rhomobile.com/road/build for Windows, there's some more detail about doing this. One particular note here is if your application is using HTTPS, that you actually, by default, that's not in the Qt library, and you need to go through and rebuild the Qt library in order for that to be available. So there's some information on that, on how to actually do that. Okay. All right. So we basically covered building for Windows 32 using RhoHub, building for Windows 32 using the local environment in this two-step process. At the end of the day, you'll have an exe that's an installer that you can then deploy to your Windows 32 users and community. So that's pretty much it on the main presentation. Before we get to the Q&A, as always, I kind of wrap up the call with a useful tidbit, right? It's really nothing super significant, but it may be interesting for some people. I'm finding that a lot of beginners are still joining the webinar, so I tend to focus on some of these things that most people may know, but I found useful. So let me jump to it right now. So I'm sure you've all seen the Chrome Developer Tools, and have used the Chrome Developer Tools, and that's not what I'm here to talk about, right? Well, it's actually one thing that's in Chrome Developer Tools that I find quite useful, and it has to do with changing and testing out different display sizes very quickly, right? So you guys, I'm sure you've seen the Developer Tools, Control-Shift-I on Windows to launch it, but have you ever, clicked on the settings, right, and played around with that? If you click on the settings, and I'm just going to dock this to the right, you can see this Overrides tab, which is really cool. Now, Firefox and Safari have user agent override, so if I want to pretend Internet Explorer 8, it'll do that. If I want to pretend I'm Firefox on the Mac, it'll do that as well. And the other browsers do this also. But what's nice is you can actually come in here and change the screen resolution on. So let's make this. Maybe there's a small, really small device, and it changes it automatically. Landscape, portrait, landscape, portrait. So you can come in here and quickly test, like, hey, what does this application look like on this resolution? What does this application look like on that resolution? You can also come in here and say, hey, what does it look like on, the new Galaxy Nexus, right? And switch the landscape mode very quickly. You can also come in here and say, okay, hey, what does it look like on the ET1 running RhoElements? Well, RhoElements, we have a different user agent string that's in the config.xml. So I'm gonna copy and paste that in here. And also, I know that the ET1 is running 1024 by 600. So now I can quickly see, hey, this is what it looks like in RhoElements on the ET1, and switch orientation that way. So just a useful tidbit, definitely a nice little quick tool that you can use. or quickly testing screen size changes, really all within one browser, right? So that's my tidbit of the week. Okay, so that ends the main presentation. Let me open it up for questions. While I'm opening up for questions, I want to ask you guys a question as well. And that should be coming soon on your screen, I think. Nope, I forgot to launch. Okay, so while we're talking about UI, I wanted to just do a quick poll. How, what UI frameworks are you using today, right? So by default, we include jQuery Mobile. There's lots of them out there. I only could, unfortunately, only put 5 choices here in the poll. But let me know what you're using, right? So anyway, while we're doing that, let's open it up for questions. If you can type in your question in the GoToMeeting section. Let me just do that on my screen here. All right. So somebody was asking about upgrading the version number on the application. That is a good question. So let's see. I know in the build.yaml we have some settings for application version. I'm not quite sure where that displays, if that displays in the About box or not when you launch the application. So I believe in the About we're really just, we are displaying the version number. I haven't tested this one out myself, but I want to say, Steve, that it's in the build.yaml, and you can change the version number there. Yeah, it is actually in the build.yaml. So once I close down the poll, I'll show that to you. All right, great. Yeah, so you confirmed that. Thanks, Steve. All right, so somebody else asked about upgrading the application. So yeah, so you can upgrade your application by just creating a new installer. Once you launch the installer, it will overwrite the current installation. Your data will still be preserved. So the Windows 32 application still has all the features that you have in your mobile application in terms of data, right? So our ROM is there, RhoConnect synchronization is there. All of that's there. It's maintained when the application is closed and launched. It's synchronized if you have it set up with RhoConnect. If you do an installation and upgrade on top, that will be maintained. If you uninstall, however, if you actually uninstall the application, then everything is stored in that folder where the application is installed, so all of the data will be uninstalled as well. Okay, so watch out for that. Somebody asked how to uninstall the app. So if you go into the installation, and let me just close the poll so I can show you, and I'll share my desktop again. All right, so I think you see my screen again. So let's go. Get these questions out of the way. So in the installation, after you kick off the installation, there's an uninstall exe. So this is how you would uninstall the application. All right, and for the person who was asking before about the version number, it's in the build.yaml. Here's the version, so you can change the version number there. All right. All right. I think that's the end of the questions. Let me just double check, make sure there's no last-minute questions coming in. Yep, I think that's it. All right. Hey, thanks everybody for joining today. Again, next week we're going to be talking about performance and UI, so stay tuned and check that out. Thanks for joining today and participating, and please do me some feedback at the end of the conference when you leave. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.